It looks like we are up and running. The time is 9:32, and so we can call the Certification Advisory Committee to order. It has been a little bit here, 6 or 7 months, as I think many of us have been saying before this meeting started. So just as a refresher, Kimberly Peasley is our chair, and so Madam Chair, if I'm going to hand it over to you, and if you'd like, because we're still virtual and the way we have been doing things, I've been kind of facilitating the meeting because it's been a little bit easier because I can see, as I'm looking at who's got their hands up and whatnot. But if you feel confident in taking it, that's certainly your prerogative. So whichever you'd like to do.
Well, I'm always very comfortable turning this virtual facilitation over to you, Catcher. So please go ahead and take us on through the agenda.
Great, thank you. And I say great with a grain of salt, of course, because facilitating this virtually while also manning the live stream and looking to see who else is a task. But luckily today, hopefully it's a shorter agenda. And you can see it here. The first up is the Executive Director's report. Of course, I'm not the Executive Director, I'm the Deputy Director, but provide updates. As part of this item, for those of you who are new, usually what we do here is I try to provide an update on what happened with the rules that this committee recommended to the board, to try to make sure you all know how the loop was closed on that. So when the committee last met in December, this committee had recommended to the full board I'm sorry, we probably should have done a roll call. I think I'll just note the attendance because we have a quorum, and then I'll note who was absent. And we did have members Tabo, Dumler, Janesh Panel, and Corporate had reached out, and Garcia had reached out to me and let me know they wouldn't be able to make it because of some travel plans. So we're missing those 5 members, but we have the remaining 8, which still gives us a quorum. And we'll do introductions later. So I'm sorry, we skipped over that. The hangover from the July 4th celebrating and breaks is apparently resonating. So the last time that this committee met was in December, and it had recommended at that time changes to the substitute and emergency substitute certificates. And if you recall, there was some discussion and there was some push from the field about some struggles getting substitute teachers in the classrooms at that time. And so the committee had recommended some changes that were worked on with the Rural Schools Association and had recommended that the board take some pretty quick action to rectify that. And the board took both of those recommendations and did in fact adopt it at the January meeting as part of emergency rulemaking, and adopted the rule as it was presented, with one exception. There were some technical changes, or what we felt were technical changes, what the committee felt were technical changes, including charter schools and some of the language. And really it was just, there was existing language, and it's still there now, that only references school districts being allowed to sign off that they had a employment issue that would necessitate hiring an emergency substitute. For those charters who wish to hire certified educators or sign off that they have an employment situation, we thought it would make sense to say that they could also sign off and that it wasn't unnecessarily restricted to school districts. The charter folks reached out to the board and had some concerns that maybe that suggested that the board was implying that their educators needed to be certified, which of course was not the suggestion, but also isn't really within the board's purview anyways. But because it was emergency rulemaking, and to allay those concerns and to get the bulk and meat of what the board and the committee was trying to do done without further issue or delay, the board agreed to take that language out. So outside of that, that rule was adopted. And again, that was just as a reminder, that removed the 120-day limit on the substitute certificate. That was a limit on how many days those educators could teach. And then for the emergency substitute certificate, it issued it for 2 years rather than 1 year. It included the 120-day limit that was previously with the substitute certificate, that it could be extended with signs off of the LEA. And then it recommended the types of courses that can be used to renew that certificate around ethics and professionalism and classroom management. So that's what happened to that rule, adopted by the board, mostly as recommended by the committee, and no further. I think the board gave some thumbs up to the committee for its collaboration, and it always does, because the board always likes having a as close to a finished product, and always appreciates the work that this committee does. So that's first agenda item. Number 2 is call to the public. We did not receive any requests to speak virtually. We also did not receive any public comments written. So we'll just move straight on to number 3, which is introduction. And for those of us who've been around and seen each other, reintroduction, but it has been 6 or 7 months, of the committee members and of staff. So we did get a couple new members appointed by the board at its last meeting in June. And so I thought it would be a good idea for you all to talk to each other and see each other virtually right now anyways, and introduce yourselves. So maybe, Madam Chair, I'll kick this one back to you and maybe let you start off and run through some committee members however you see fit, and then we'll kick it over to department staff and board staff.
Okay, thank you very much, Catcher. My name is Kim Peasley. I serve as the special education representative on this committee. I am semi-retired, working as a special education administration consultant to charter schools and school districts, now mostly in Yavapai County. But I've been a special education director, and I spent most of my career, though, as a special education teacher. From self-contained classrooms to ending my teaching career for the last few years as a co-teacher in general education. So that is me. And how about if I just run down the people on as I see you on my screen? Let's go to Patty, Dr. Horn.
Thank you. I appreciate being able to be a part of this committee. I am a professor at Northern Arizona University, and I represent the public universities on this committee. So it's an honor to be here, and I welcome all of our new members.
Thank you. Lene?
Hi, I'm Linnea Lighting, and I am the Education Department Chair at Arizona Christian University. So I represent the private universities in the state. I have a background also in special ed and in gen ed. So,
thank you. Next up is Betsy.
I'm Betsy Farah. I am the Executive Director of Horizon Honors Schools, which is a charter school. So I represent the charter schools.
Thank you, Betsy. Matt?
Yes, I'm Matt Weber. I'm the superintendent of the Navaj Career and Technical Education District. So I'm the CTE rep on this committee. Appreciate the opportunity to work with you.
Thank you. We'll go to Kristen.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Kinghorn. I am principal at Anderson Elementary with the Chandler Unified School District. So I am representing public schools and principals.
Thank you, Kristen. Next is Steve.
I'm Steve Watson. I'm the Maricopa County School Superintendent, and I'm representing the county school superintendents. And I was a classroom teacher for 15 years, and my undergrad is in Spanish, and my master's degree is in education with an emphasis in languages, and it's great to be a part of the committee.
It's good to have both of you here now. Thank you. And there's somebody on the phone. Who's on the phone, please? Catcher, do we know who's on the phone?
I believe it was member Tabo, who I might have earlier said was not here, but I believe, yeah, it's member Tabo. I think she is in attendance, and I think she is driving, is what she told me. but she is from, I believe she's still there, Deer Valley.
Mhm.
And I apologize, Member Tabo, if I'm doing your introduction for you, but I believe she's with Deer Valley. I think she's a reading specialist there.
Yes. Yes, she is.
And Member Peasley, before we move on to staff, I'll just, if I could real quick, the members who are not here, and I don't want to do their introductions for them, but just so everyone knows, Member Garcia, who is, I believe, maybe president-elect, or I'm not sure if her term has started yet, of AEA, but she's also an teacher at, oh shoot, in the West Valley. I forgot the school, but she's also a teacher and now president or president-elect of AEA. Dr. Robbie Korporich is superintendent of Holbrook. He's the superintendent representative. Member Janesh Pinnell is one of our public members, but she also owns or is part of CEO or in leadership of Coy Education, which Member Peasley or Chair Peasley would be able to give a little more information on. So just a little bit of information about the other ones who are here, and I'm sure you'll all get to meet them, new ones, and we'll all get to see them again for those of us who have seen them. So maybe department staff next up would be good.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start off and then hand off. I'm Bruce Duplanty. I'm the Deputy Associate Superintendent, and my areas are certification, educator prep program review approval, as well as the educator recruitment retention team. And I won't go through my teaching career, but I'll just notify, or I'll just kind of highlight some connections here with the NAU with Patty, as well as the superintendent's office with Steve, was a peer evaluator prior to coming to the agency, and then the Deer Valley connection with Steve and Member Tabo. So anyway, some connections there. So I'll hand it off next to my team, the Director of Certification, Michelle.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Brady. I'm the Director of Educator Certification. I have about 20 years of experience in education from a teacher, instructional coach, and administration. And I've been with the department about 3.5 years now.
My name is Maura Yildirim. I'm the Rules and Procedures Coordinator. I have been with the department since December of 2003. And actually before that, before I had my son, I was here between 95 and 97. So I can offer some historical perspective.
And
Yes, Mara, we did go back a long way, don't we? Back to your ESS days. I'm sorry, Catcher, go ahead.
No, it's good to highlight the institutional knowledge that we have at our disposal here. And I am Catcher Bain. I'm Deputy Director here at the State Board of Education, so a different agency from Bruce, Mara, and Michelle, but obviously we work very closely. And one of the duties of my job is staffing this committee and trying to give you all the information you need and make sure that I don't embarrass the board too much. I did miss one of our other committee members who is unable to be here, Carolyn Dumler, who's also been a longtime member of this committee. I think along with Chair Peasley, maybe on the committee since inception. She's with Marana, which is my alma mater, Marana Unified School District. She is our HR representative. So apologies to Carolyn for missing her earlier.
And she's also the vice chair of this committee.
Yes.
And Ann Tebow is the other original member of this committee. Going back to, I think, 2006.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay, well, that was, thank you all. And I should have mentioned this earlier, that I really appreciate members Kinghorn and Watson for stepping up and getting in these positions. I want to let you know that Mr. Hendrickson and the county school superintendent, they were not jettisoned for bad conduct. They just, Mr. Hendrickson moved on to a different position in his district, and in Chandler, and was on it, didn't fit into that principal position anymore. So unfortunately, we just had to replace him, but we're glad that he's got that opportunity. And then of course, the county school superintendent position, has been vacant for a little while, and Mr. Tyree got a job in Yuma as a superintendent down there. So appreciate both them stepping up, but wanted to make sure that the committee wasn't nervous that those members were replaced for bad behavior or anything. Just moving on. So the next up on the agenda is number 4. That's presentation and discussion of the purpose of the committee. Again, just a refresher, because we haven't been around for a while, and for the new members, even the new members, we've had some discussions with you when you're being appointed by the board, but just something to hit again here. And as Chair Peasley pointed out so deftly, the committee was created in 2006. And so we had some members who've been around for a while there, and the chair can give some more context on this than I can, but because she was there for it. But prior to this committee, rule writing for certification rules was done a little more informally, which has its advantages in that it allowed the board to be a little more flexible in writing rules and a little more expeditious. However, it did lead to some, I think what the board identified at the time as inconsistencies without a formal process to review and write those rules, and with different stakeholders moving in and out as it comes, and with the board and the public not having as transparent of a process. So the board instituted the CAC to formalize that process, bring a little more transparency, and try to bring some consistency to that rule writing. And in that vein, has, as you've seen, tried to keep a lot of consistency with the committee membership when possible, to try to help with that consistency and institutional knowledge. And luckily, Mara has also been around with the department long enough to right our wrongs or correct our direction if we're going off the rails on something that was maybe tried before and didn't work, or upending previous rules that were done for a certain reason. And we kind of went over the committee membership, and as you can guess, we meet. We're scheduled to meet once a month as needed. I think that has ebbs and flows, and it's certainly gone down in the number of meetings in the last couple of years. There was a spate there where the legislature was instituting a lot of changes to the certification rules, and the board was interested in a lot of changes to the certification rules about 5-6 years ago. And so this committee was meeting, monthly, twice a month, pretty frequently, and pretty long meetings to try to get through very meaty rules. That's tailed off over the last couple of years. There's been some new certificates and some changes here and there, but nothing as meaty as it was then. So it's been a handful of meetings a year, mostly to institute changes from the legislature, but also to do some other things around the edges. And we'll talk about some other things that on staff, both the board and the department staff, are thinking of for the next few months here for this committee to work on, which is really when we want the bulk of the work of this committee to happen, which is after the legislative session into the fall and winter. And if needed, we can, push back the delays or the effective dates of those things into the subsequent school year if schools need time to adjust, or if educator preparation programs need time to adjust as it so happens. So the recommendations of this committee aren't final. The board can change them, they can modify them, they can reject them. However, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think the board puts a lot of trust in this committee. And so a lot of the recommendations that come out of this committee are taken, are given a lot of weight and are taken by the board. And if things are changed, it's usually stuff around the edges like I had described at the beginning of the meeting. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or maybe, Madam Chair, I don't know if you wanted to throw in anything in there before we move on or open it to questions.
I think you covered it pretty well. In the years since the committee's inception, when we would have all-day meetings and sometimes even twice a month to clear the backlog of requests, we've really come a long way, and we have established a strong protocol for the consideration of the certification recommendations, so that there's a background work that is done before a proposal comes to the committee. We used to do the investigations and the questioning of stakeholders and requests for additional information. And now what happens is we get packages that come complete to us. And it has been, that has done a lot to reduce the time, the amount of time, and gives us a lot of more information and clear information to review, so that when we come to the committee, we're able to have rich, full discussions, and we have the questions to ask. As a member of the committee, we do anticipate and expect participation from everybody. So if someone is sitting back kind of quietly, we're not putting you on the spot when we call on you, but it is part of that consideration that the state board has for us, that they know that all of the stakeholders on this committee have had a voice in all of the recommendations. And they are assured that we have had a thorough discussion of the unintended consequences, because that's what got us here to begin with, the unintended consequences of stakeholder groups coming and requesting changes from their standpoint, not realizing that it had impact in other areas. So that's just it. This is an incredibly important committee because it hits every single educational institution. It hits not only the schools, as district administration, support services, but the colleges and universities, because any of the changes that we make that deal with courses and preparation has to go through those our colleges and universities. So we've got to have their voices. There's no voice that's less important than any others. And we all think, and that's what we do. We just think globally about the impact based on all of our collective experiences in this field. That's it.
Well said, Madam Chair. I should also, if you haven't noticed, and I hope you have, it is a public body, so we do have to have public meetings and postings, and we do live stream the meetings. We did pre-pandemic, had met in person. As you can imagine, since then, we have remained virtual. We've had discussions about getting back at least in some form in person, maybe a hybrid setting. We do have some construction happening around our board room, so that might change, or we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But we have noticed it is, because you're all very busy people and you're all intentionally from around the state. And so we have noticed it is nice to have more than just a phone call in option, but a virtual option, because, you know, we have folks from hours away from Central Phoenix, and helps boost the attendance, and you know, we want you all attending, and certainly want the public to be a part of it too, which those hybrid options allow for. So stay tuned for that on the setting and how it's set up. If it is hybrid, it'll still be Zoom, but depending on where it is, somewhere in Central Phoenix, but we'll keep you posted as we move forward. So next up, as we move through this agenda, is number 5, which is what we do after every legislative session adjourns, which is a sort of wrap up of the session in terms of changes to educator certification and what that means for this committee, and the things that you'll be seeing outside of those changes, but also any other changes that staff might be thinking of and recommending moving forward. So this year, I think since I started at the board, which was in 2016 or 17, well, I can't remember, about 5 years. This might have been the least amount of certification changes coming from the legislature. Still changes to come, but this might be the least amount. And it was in the form of Senate Bill 1159, which passed on the last day of session with some amendments. You see the changes summarized here. I'll go through them very briefly and try to provide some context. And this, again, not taking action on this, just to give you an idea of what's going to be coming in the next month and 2 months and what have you, however long it takes the committee to work through it. So you have an idea and a sort of frame of reference, and also a link to the bill if you want to look at language of it. So the first, probably most significant thing that this bill does is establishes a locally based leadership preparation program. Now, if that sounds familiar, we already have a classroom-based preparation program that was established a few years ago in 2016, I believe, or 2017. And classroom-based preparation program are programs approved by the state to allow school districts or charter schools to essentially act as educator preparation programs. They're or kind of like grow your own programs. So they can set up their own program, oftentimes in partnership with higher ed. Could be, we've had some partnered with Ria Salato to provide coursework and training to candidates who are not yet fully certified with a standard certificate. They might have a substitute certificate or emergency substitute certificate to get them a full certificate, a classroom-based certificate to teach in their school. So this is, and we have about 6 now of those classroom-based preparation programs approved in the state. So this legislation is to essentially do the same, but to do it for leadership. So that would be principals and above. I can't remember. Well, yeah, principals. And the language is almost exactly the same from the classroom-based stuff. So for this committee and for the rules, and there's also some statutory language about how both of those programs need to be very much within the bounds of what the legislature authorized. So there are some limitations on what the board can adopt and rule in terms of additional requirements. They codified for the classroom-based preparation program some of the rules and some of the things that the board and the department have been doing for reviewing those programs, but they were largely procedural codification. So, requesting the application have certain information, not necessarily substantive to the program, but things that the state just needs, like contact information. You're probably going to see some rules from us that are recommended to you all that are largely kind of drag and drop from the statute, because that's kind of the bounds that we've been given by the legislature. The second bullet kind of hits on that. There was one change as part of the classroom-based stuff that they would allow candidates to enter into those classroom-based prep programs without a bachelor's degree if they meet certain criteria. There's certain bars they still have to jump, clear in order to enter that program. Now, when they leave the program, they will need to end up having a bachelor's degree to obtain their classroom-based certificate, but they can enter without. And these classroom-based prep programs aren't giving them bachelor's degrees, so those candidates will have to get that bachelor's degree somewhere outside of the program. I'm not sure how many candidates that would capture, but that is something that the statute allows for.
Hector, does that mean that the bachelor's degree, is that any degree, so that somebody might be in a preparation program for any other college degree, that will count, or do they need to, will their degree need to be in education?
Madam Chair, the legislation and the statute is silent on that, and I'm certain the intent is that it would be any bachelor's degree. The third bullet point you see up there is around the subject matter expert certificate. As a reminder, that's a 612 certificate that allows people who have a bachelor's degree or higher in the subject area. I think the language is substantially similar to the subject area. If they have work experience 5 years or more in that area, or if they were a higher ed instructor for, I believe, 2 of the last 3 years or something like that in that area. The only change it makes to that certificate is to require those holders to obtain ethics and professionalism training within 2 years of receiving their certificate. And they also have to attest to have reviewed the board's cell phone and social media guidance prior to obtaining their certificate. That's actually a change that the board had asked the proponents for. And actually the board had asked for that when the bill as introduced expanded the subject matter expert certificate from 612 all the way down to elementary school. It would have been a K-12 or it would have been split K-5 and 612. We would have had to try to figure that out with the department, but it would have expanded the grades that those subject matter experts could have served. That was amended out. However, this language stayed in. And the reason, just for your context and information, even though this doesn't hit on this committee, the board requested that language because although there are not a lot of subject matter expert certificate holders out there, and the number of those certificate holders who have been disciplined is low because there are not many of individuals holding those certificates, the rate that the board is disciplining those certificate holders is, I believe, third or fourth highest in the state. And when the board does discipline those educators, it is disproportionately high for some of the most serious offenses. Now, caveats with sample size, because as I mentioned, it's a small number. And so those rates might level out after a few years. However, it was something that the board found concerning enough to raise to the attention of the legislature, and they agreed to put that amendment in, which I think the board was very appreciative of. So we'll probably put some language in the rule to codify that new statutory requirement. I'm not sure if there's anything else that needs to be clarified with it, but if there is, we'll certainly recommend it and vet it, and I'll figure that out.
Catcher, are there recommendations for the content for the ethics and professionalism training?
Yes,
or will we be setting that?
No, great question, Madam Chair. So there's already some language in the teacher standards and things that educator preparation programs have to do around classroom management, ethics, and professionalism. There's also, as part of it's not in the summary here, but it is part of the legislation, that one of the options that has to be available to these educators is a no-cost option provided by the board. And the reason we had worked on that language is that the legislature was also good enough to give the board some money around educator discipline and some other things. And so that's something that the board has wanted to do for a while, is create some free options around ethics and professionalism for educators to access and for schools to refer their educators to if they feel needed. And the board's vision is to use, case studies that the board has seen specifically as examples of where the boundaries are, because in a lot of cases the board has found sometimes the educators just don't understand the boundaries, and sometimes that can lead to slippery slope things. Sometimes there's going to be bad actors who are going to act that way regardless, but a lot of times the board is finding there's just boundaries that educators are crossing that they didn't realize they shouldn't cross, and that has led to misconduct. And so that's the plan for a lot of that. I don't think outside of the specifics of it, I think the board might want to give LEAs a lot of flexibility in how they structure if they want to offer that training. But that's something we can discuss more if the committee and the board has strong opinions on that. All right, the fourth bullet point makes a change to a statute provision that was added a few years ago. I think, again, in 16 or 17, when a lot of these other changes were made, there was a provision that was added that allows individuals who have an expired cert that expired between 2 and 10 years. So if your cert is between 2 and 10 years expired and old, the statute allows them to reobtain that certificate without any additional requirements if they had 10 years full-time experience in that area that they're seeking renewal in. And the thinking at the time was, I believe there might have even been a constituent who had retired who wanted to re-enter, but they had 30 years of teaching experience, so their degree and stuff was from a while ago, and some certification changes and requirements had been added both since they were in the profession but also since they had retired. And so the thinking was we should try to make it easier to get these retired folks who want to get back in the classroom into the classroom. So the change that was made, so that's been there for about 5 years now. The change that was made in Senate Bill 1159 was to remove that requirement that they have 10 years of full-time teaching experience. So if they have an expired cert that's between 2 and 10 years old, they can get that without that 10 years of full-time teaching experience, as long as it's in the area as long as the old cert that they had lines up to the renewal of the cert that they want. And renewal isn't, I don't have Bruce on my box screen here, but he might be smirking because renewal isn't really the right verbiage here, but that's a reissuance of that expired certificate.
Catcher, I do have a question, and just to clarify for the committee, you mentioned those that have a certificate expired within 2 to 10 years. What about those who have a certificate that expires in less than 1 year? What are their options for renewal?
Yeah, Madam Chair, and Bruce can correct me. I think when we had, so the reason that 2 and 10 years was in there was, I think there's some flexibility that the department might already provide, but I think there might also be other routes. So Bruce or Mara, I'm sorry to put you guys on the spot, but I believe it wasn't because the state hated teachers who had retired only a year ago. I believe there was because there were already options for them, but maybe Bruce can help me out.
So the renewal requirements are currently, you have a year after expiring to prove renewal requirements, which is 15 clock hours of professional development, which is really wide open. So any education type training or coursework, or any content area training or coursework, and it's all defined. And there's a lot of options. There's lots of freebies out there, but anybody, according to rule currently, anybody who expires has 1 year. The cert is inactive, but until we're considered it lapsed. So there still is kind of that now gap year with this new legislation where kind of no man's land, but then 2 years after. And the number one problem that we were seeing is folks verifying their 10 years of teaching time, because those folks don't exist in HR departments anymore. Or sometimes the records are past the date of keeping them. So this is really beneficial to the folks that want to get their certs back after a few years.
And that's why Bruce and his team are on these calls. And he even asked me, I was like, it's just going to be an informational meeting. And I said, but you got to be there, not just for introductions, because I need you. I need you, Bruce. And there he is, he's coming.
We need all of you. Thank you. And and that's the other thing, since we have been around for so long, we need all of our expertise, and especially the certification departments for that historical information and where we all are, because so many issues come through us that sometimes we don't always remember how we got here on an issue.
Great points. And then just to wrap up on Senate Bill 1159, the last bullet point there is ADE has to report some certification data that will not be most likely making it in any rule, but just information for you all to have. And I know this committee certainly avails itself of a lot of the certification data anytime. Member Peasley had mentioned earlier packages that are provided to this committee. Usually we have sort of a list of things that are given to this committee when somebody proposes a new rule. Sometimes we get outside groups. One of those things that we provide to the committee is, who we worked with on it, what other states are doing, but to this point, how many of those certificates are out there, how many are issued, those types of things. And then sometimes if Bruce and his team have time and if it's relevant to the discussion, they'll also provide things like breakdowns of maybe why certain certificates are being denied, and if that's something that the committee wants to look at in the rule, or if it's something that the committee wants to talk to educator preparation programs about, and et cetera and so forth. So that is Senate Bill 1159. You'll be seeing that from us in the next few months here with some changes on how to codify that into rule. As you can tell, a lot of it's codification. I'm not sure, when we get together, we'll decide on staff if we think there are things we should recommend to the committee to flesh out a little more. rule. And of course, the committee can make those suggestions as well. And we can see if that's allowable under the statute and if the will is there amongst the committee. Some other things to look forward to here in the next couple months that are not legislatively directed, specifically anyways, are considerations around the endorsement rules. I think you've heard me tease that a couple times here. The department has been working on some ideas on how to clean up the endorsements in rule to try to make it a little cleaner. As you can remember, the Madam Chair had kind of highlighted this, but certification rules are pretty beefy. There's a lot of them. And over time, we've continued adding routes to obtain certificates, or the legislature has. And so those rules are only getting bigger and more complex and more interwoven. And so sometimes over time, they're not as clear as they could be, or they're not as clean as they could be. And we need to do some stuff like what the department is cooking up right now, which is just some cleanup of how it's structured and how it's worded and how it operates. There's also some other things that we've gotten some requests from the field. Over the years, the legislature has instituted some requirements for schools around like EpiPen training, emergency administration of epinephrine, of inhalers. There was one passed this last year around seizure management training. There was a request for those trainings to count towards certificate renewal for educators. Now, I think in some ways the rule is already pretty open, and if an LEA signs off, in a lot of ways, I think that counts as long as there's some sort of tie to the educator standards. But if LEA is signing off, they're verifying that kind of thing. However, there was a request for the board and therefore the committee to consider just clarifying if you've seen the renewal rule. It says, the continuing education hours, including being a example, like for example, it could be these things, but it's not an exhaustive list and it doesn't have to be those things. And it's a whole list of things, which also include other statutory language that has passed over the years, like suicide prevention awareness training and things like that. So there was a request just to add that to the list of the includings, the examples, just for clarity's sake. So those are the things that we have on our docket. Of course, we will try to let you know if something else pops up. And sometimes things do, just like the substitute certificate in December, sometimes things just percolate and need some action. But we'll try to give you advance warning as much as possible and try to provide you with materials at least a week in advance, if not the weekend before, to try to give you some time to take a look at it. But are there any questions or comments or concerns on this item and some of the things the committee is going to be working on in the next few months?
I guess I have a question, since we all are representing stakeholders. What is the recommendation for us to reach out to our groups when we get the rule? Because a lot of times when we meet, we have the information to make that recommendation, take our recommendations to the board.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's a good question. I think the board very much, appointed each of you for your individual expertise and the expertise that you bring to the committee, and the chair had kind of explained some of that, how all of your personal opinions on it and your professional experience and expertise is important. However, the board really values also the connections you all have with your colleagues in that same field. So whether that be other principals or CTE representatives or county school superintendents or in educator preparation programs or charter schools or wherever it may be, certainly values your understanding of the field, how it would impact your colleagues, and also your connections with your colleagues so you can talk to them. So of course, I think the board would greatly appreciate it if you had time to sort of vet those, and it could be informally or formally, depending on your passion for the subject or what you think, based on your knowledge of the area, if it would raise to the level of concern or awareness with your colleagues. Yeah, your personal expertise, but also you're representing that group of individuals that you were appointed on that position to fill.
Thank you. I think that concludes my gentle questions to help orient our new members.
Well, it probably should have been part of my other items, but that's why you're the chair and I am not. Last up here, as we hopefully get close to wrapping up what I had promised to be a quick meeting on the day after 4th of July, is just future meeting dates and future agenda items. If committee members have things they would like to see on a future agenda, they can certainly ask for that, and now would be the time. If not, this is just me telling you our next meeting's scheduled for August 2nd. I try to provide, usually the week before, maybe 2 weeks before, I try to let you know if it's actually going to happen or not, and try to give you at least an idea of what's going to be on the agenda. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, try to give you the materials at least like the Friday before the meeting. That way you have the weekend and a Monday to look at it, if not, a full calendar week. But that's what's next. And if we don't have that meeting, then it's September. I don't have the date in front of me, but it's the first Tuesday of every month is generally, unless we have holidays that interfere.
And it's just nice to have this date and these dates and times on our calendar, because they fill up so fast. There is so much to do that when we don't have a meeting on a given month, we get that little gift of time that is appreciated. I see the heads nodding. Yes, you understand, we get that. So thank you so much, Catcher, for the information, and Bruce and everybody else for being here.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the gift of time, I think it's appropriate for me to give that to all of you now. So seeing no further questions, I don't see any hands raised or anything. We will, at 10:19, adjourn the committee, call it a day. And if you all need anything from me, feel free to reach out to me at any time. If you need anything from other committee members, you can certainly reach out to them. Just be aware of some open meeting law stuff, which I think you all are aware of, and very excited to work with you all in the coming months and hopefully years. And thank you all for attending today.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Catcher.
Thank you.
Kim.
Everybody,
Thank you,
take care.
Catcher.
Bye.
See everybody next month.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.